Double infidelity. Please, Kyle, I was drunk and I didn't know what I was doing. I had more than a few drinks. I don't know, maybe I was drugged. Anyway, I passed out, or maybe I was just in a drunken stupor. But when I came to my senses and realized what was happening, I tried to stop everything. I really wanted to, but they wouldn't stop. There were too many of them. I think 2 of them held me down while the others did whatever they wanted to me. I hated it all. I was so ashamed. Susie looked at herself in the large mirror built into the closet door in her bedroom. She still had her figure, though her body was no longer as slim and trim as it had been when she had married at 22, and at 42 she was more rounded and softer, but still as sexy. The events of last night were proof of that. Sure, she'd had a drink at the club, but she hadn't been drunk or drugged. In fact, she'd initiated much of what had happened herself. It wasn't that the male strippers at her friend Beth's bachelorette party weren't ready for this. It was just that Susie was more prepared. Of course, Kyle mustn't find out the truth. She knew Kyle loved her, truly loved her, but she also knew what Kyle thought of those who cheat, especially about errant wives. Susie knew that there would be no marital counseling, no reconciliation, nothing to stop dear old Kyle from filing for and eventually getting a divorce. Susie realized that she couldn't keep what had happened a secret, that the perverse pleasure of the adventure would sooner or later give her away. Kyle would instantly pick up on any change in her behavior. She couldn't tell the whole truth, but she could intertwine truth with fantasy, and with a story like this, she had a chance to save her marriage. As Susie's thoughts came back into focus, she noticed movement in the mirror. It was Kyle's receding back. Oh no. Did he hear me? How much did he hear? Haunted by despair, Susie mentally pulled herself together. Kyle? Honey, is that you? There was dead silence in response. A fear she had never felt before sprang up in her stomach and ran up her body, penetrating her chest, shoulders, arms, and finally reaching her brain. She whimpered pitifully in response. Her breathing quickened, and sweat suddenly appeared on her forehead and upper lip. Her armpits were soaked, and Susie was stinking with fear. Susie tried to suppress the urge to run after Kyle, as she was afraid her guilt would become apparent. No, better to act normal, even puzzled, no matter what reaction he showed. Susie slowly walked out of the bedroom and headed for the kitchen. Her knees buckled and her legs trembled. She thought that Kyle would easily notice the trembles shaking her body now. He would see her, all shaking. And he'd understand. Kyle, honey, is that you? Susie asked quietly before entering the kitchen. Not a sound reached her ears. Susie entered the kitchen, but it was empty. A frustrated sigh escaped her mouth. Where was he? In the study? Or had he gone to his precious garage to tinker with that old junk? Good thing Kyle wasn't in the kitchen. Susie was so tense with excitement, she wasn't sure if she could lie at this point. Better to calm down before trying to find her husband. Having made her decision, Susie set about preparing dinner. Pretty soon, fussing in the kitchen, Susie forgot all about her nervousness. An hour later, dinner was ready and Susie had calmed down. Enough to face Kyle and realize her deception. Kyle, dinner's ready, she shouted. A couple minutes later, she heard the front door open and close. Heavy footsteps crossed the living room floor, the sound dying down as the footsteps headed along the hallway. Susie assumed that Kyle had gone to wash up, and a few minutes later, her hunch was confirmed. When Kyle entered the kitchen, his hands were clean, but there were still stains of lube and dirt on his clothes. Without a word to Susie, Kyle sat down and started eating. He didn't even look at her. Feeling slightly discouraged by his silence, Susie asked sarcastically, "Couldn't you have told me you were going to work on that pile of garbage of yours before you left me alone?" Her only answer was a grunt while Kyle sent food to his mouth. "Why did you come in the front door? I thought you were in the garage. You could have come in through the kitchen door," Susie said, persistently trying to engage Kyle in conversation. His only response was to chew his food even louder than usual. Wisely deciding to back off for now, Susie fell into a sullen silence. She understood that Kyle was angry, but for what reason? Was he angry that she was gone until dawn? Susie didn't get home until after 2 in the morning, maybe even closer to 3. She couldn't remember exactly. although she hadn't drunk much when the intense sexual activity of that evening began, with the many hard, naked bodies, the heady aftertaste of multiple pleasures, the long drive home and subsequent shower, the idea of her going to bed was more a blur of vague, scattered memories than any clear picture. The thought of last night's prank almost brought a smile to Susie's face, but she managed to hold it back before she gave herself away. A quick glance away from her food convinced her that Kyle was more interested in what was on his plate than what might be on her face. Relaxing again, Susie wondered again if Kyle had heard her a little earlier. If he had heard her, she would explain everything easily. She would explain that she was nervous, ashamed, and afraid of what Kyle would think and say about using her. That's why she struggled to find the words both for him and for herself, as she was also trying to come to terms with it. This is the reason for the verbalization of her thoughts earlier. Satisfied with her rationale, she felt even more at ease and finished her dinner with a pleasure she hadn't felt in a long time. Finished eating, Kyle got up from the table, walked out of the kitchen and headed for the garage. Later, before going to bed, he showered and went straight to bed, falling asleep without saying a word to his wife all night. Susie, tired from the previous night's lack of sleep, wasn't too concerned about Kyle's behavior. She felt capable of dealing with his anxiety, and tomorrow would come soon enough to work things out. She was soon asleep, and a slight smile graced her usually relaxed face. Soon the bedroom was filled only with the sounds of breathing, one slow in a steady rhythm, the other unevenly punctuated. "Beth, it's Susie. Please call me." This was the third call Susie had made to her best friend today. Usually Beth either answered right away or returned the call quickly. Not that Susie was too worried about Beth's silence, after all. Her wedding was only 2 days away, and the poor girl still had a million things to do before walking down the aisle. Susie just wanted to make sure that if Kyle happened to run into Beth or the other girls at the bachelorette party, they wouldn't say anything bad to him. Kyle's silent behavior the day before, which had continued into the morning, was unusual for his usually cheerfully outgoing morning self, which to Susie was a crucial cause for concern. Sighing anxiously, Susie went back to work. She wasn't really able to concentrate, but she had to at least pretend to work. "Kyle, I'm home! Where are you, honey?" Susie knew Kyle was home because his SUV was parked in the driveway. In fact, if she remembered correctly, the SUV was parked in exactly the same spot as yesterday. Had Kyle not driven to work today? Was he sick? Why hadn't he told her that this morning? "Kyle, where are you?" Silence was her only answer. Anxiety brought on by fear and uncertainty ran quickly through her body, sending tingling shards of ice through her heart. Susie ran up the stairs to their bedroom. It was empty. She ran to the closet and swung the door open. A nervous sigh of relief escaped her lips. Kyle's clothes hung there. Not a single shirt or pants seemed to be missing. His shoes were neatly arranged on the floor of the closet, and all were in place as well. Susie crept backward until her feet touched the edge of the mattress, and she sat up abruptly on the bed. Where on earth is Kyle? His SUV is in the driveway, which means he must be home. He never went anywhere unless he was driving himself. Then a thought hit her, and a slight smile lit up her face. He's working in the garage on his old junk. That's about it. It's Friday. Kyle left work early, came home, and started working on his project. With renewed energy, Susie jumped up and practically danced her way to the garage. Opening the kitchen door leading into the garage, she stepped down onto the step and cheerfully said, "Kyle, I'm home. How was yours?" The garage was plunged into darkness. His wrecked car stood in the center of the garage, a grim, shadowy hulk, but Kyle was gone. Damn it! Where is he? Hurrying into the garage, Susie passed through the kitchen and looked out the window overlooking the backyard. The yard was small, so it was easy to see if anyone was there or not. Kyle wasn't in the backyard. Getting nervous again, Susie walked around the house looking for her husband. No, he was nowhere to be found. Her nervousness quickly turned to worry and then fear. Had Kyle abandoned her? Would she hear the doorbell ring and there would be a court courier handing her legal papers? Papers that would turn out to be a divorce petition? Kyle would be home soon. He must have gone out with one of his friends. Somewhat reassured by that thought, Susie set about preparing dinner. Focusing on cooking again, she managed to forget her worries for a while. When she had finished cooking dinner, Susie sat down at the table. With each bite of food, anxious thoughts raced through her mind. Kyle had never gone so long without telling her where he was going or how long he would be gone. Now Susie was sure that Kyle had heard her rehearsing her excuse, an excuse that now seemed unconvincing and was becoming more ridiculous by the minute. Why did she do it? Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Honestly, she didn't have an answer. Kyle could be tiresome at times, but overall he was a good man, a good husband. He doted on her and always had a funny story to share with her. Still, sometimes she didn't want to hear what he had to say. However, as an obedient wife, she sat quietly, listened, and sometimes even laughed at his stories. Moreover, they rarely quarreled, and on the few occasions when they did, he never raised his voice or hand at her. No matter how idyllic her marriage seemed, it must have been missing something, or she would never have done anything to destroy it. Right? Or maybe she was a hidden whore? She'd had fantasies involving more than one man, at least two men at the same time. Though she wouldn't mind three, one for each of her three holes. The thought of being fucked in her pussy, ass, and mouth all at the same time made her knees go weak in her knees. It made her pussy tingle with anticipation and made her so wet that there was more than one occasion when she had to change her panties because those were heavily soaked with her desire. She had never shared this fantasy with Kyle. First of all, Susie was sure Kyle would take it the wrong way. Second, none of her fantasies had involved Kyle. Not that Kyle was a bad lover. In truth, Kyle tried very hard to please her in bed. He always wanted to try something new. Some of it she even liked, but most of it she rejected. Even so, Kyle always made sure she had an orgasm, and she did, most of the time. Not that she faked that many orgasms, though there were a few times when she just made the right motions. For those few times, she couldn't blame her husband. She just wasn't reaching that erotic peak where she could come. It was during those times that Susie thought her marriage and sex were a little outdated. Naturally, Susie now wished that Wednesday night's party had never happened at all. The position she had put herself in was a sure path to self-destruction. In fact, as she questioned her actions and motives, the perverse pleasure that had filled her yesterday and most of today washed away, leaving only the guilt of her infidelity. A little more time passed as Susie reflected on her life and the paths she had chosen in it. In the end, Susie came to the conclusion that honestly, nothing in her marriage could justify her cheating on Kyle. Even after making that decision, Susie still didn't understand what had pushed her to cheat. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. It was getting dark as she sat thinking about her life and waiting for her husband. She had eaten a little, but her plate was still more than half full of already cold food. She lazily noticed how tasteless that one was. When she lifted her head, her neck creaked protestingly, sending pain from herself to her shoulders. Wonder how long she'd been sitting like that. A glance at the kitchen wall clock answered that question. It was a little after 9. She had sat almost motionless for over 2 hours. With a tired sigh caused by the pain in her lower back, she rose from the table. Susie began to clean up after herself. After a few minutes, she put the food away, though she hesitated for a moment, fearing that Kyle would be hungry when she got home. But then a surge of anger rushed through her, washing away the worry. Kyle had been gone all evening without saying a word to her, without letting her know where he was, so wherever he was when he got home, he could damn well worry about his own stomach. With quick, angry motions, she finished cleaning up and decided to take a bubble bath. She was tense and really needed to relax. Susie was beginning to suspect that Kyle was playing some kind of game, staying away to pay her back for coming over at such a late hour on a Thursday morning. Well, she wasn't going to play that game, and within moments, Susie was soaking in a hot bath full of frothy bubbles. It was about 11 o'clock when Susie wiped herself down and dressed to go to bed. She still felt sore from the sex she had 2 nights ago, but the bath helped ease that too. Relieved, she lay down expecting to be about to fall asleep, but the other side of the bed, devoid of the presence of her snoring husband, disturbed her in some strange and unexpected way. Susie thought about calling Kyle on his cell phone, but quickly dismissed the thought as soon as it crossed her mind. She wasn't going to fall for his tricks, and she certainly wasn't going to give in first. Yes, she had cheated, but until it happened, it was just a fantasy. So, she hadn't planned it. It was a stupid mistake. It was a terrible mistake that would bother her for years to come, but she would never admit that she had cheated. She didn't want to lose her marriage. She loved Kyle. Deep down, she knew she would never make a mistake like that again. So why expose it? It would only hurt everyone and solve nothing. She felt like she wouldn't feel more guilty than she did right now. No, she would bear it alone, hoping and praying that Kyle would never find out. If he did find out, well, she refused to take that thought any further. The best thing to do was to continue acting like nothing had happened, to act like she had all the time of their marriage, and that meant not calling Kyle. More or less satisfied with her logic, she made herself comfortable and slowly drifted into a serene slumber. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The sound of the door closing wasn't too loud, but it made Susie awake and instantly alert. She saw some dark figure moving in the bedroom. Is it really Kyle? Susie asked herself anxiously. The figure walked slowly and very quietly into the bathroom, closed the door without closing it completely, and with the flick of a switch, the bathroom light illuminated the small vertical slit with a diffused yellow light. Susie lay still, listening. She was sure it was Kyle. Who else would walk into the house and do something so mundane? But what time was it? Glancing at the glowing numbers on the alarm clock, Susie noted with some annoyance that it was 2:55. Where had Kyle been all this time? He hadn't come in this late in years. Had he been drinking, drowning his sorrows? Susie was about to yell at him, demanding an explanation about where he'd been and why he'd come in so late, when she heard his voice. She couldn't make out what he was saying as he spoke softly, so she slowly got out of bed, trying not to make any noise. As Susie quietly approached the bathroom door, his words reached her ears. To think. She said she just wanted to talk. She was so angry I didn't realize what was going on. She said she wanted to talk. We drank a little bit while we talked, and then, I don't know how it happened, but somehow I woke up in this motel room. I felt really drunk, and I had somebody on me. When I saw what was happening, I tried to resist, but I was still drunk or maybe drugged. I barely had the strength to breathe, let alone fight back. I was held down by several women, and each one took turns pouncing on me. I'm sorry, honey, but it wasn't my fault. What's Kyle talking about in there? Is he saying he was raped? By multiple women? Or maybe she was a hidden cheater? She wouldn't mind 3, though. Regardless, Kyle always made sure she experienced pleasure. Not that she faked that much, though there were a few times when she just made the right moves. She just wasn't reaching that erotic peak. It was during those times that Susie thought her marriage and lovemaking was a little outdated. She still felt the ache from the lovemaking she had 2 nights ago, but the bath helped ease that too. Is he saying he was used? Susie asked herself with growing anger, listening to her husband from the shadows of the bedroom. How can a woman use a man? Susie asked herself. He must be a willing participant. Overwhelmed with anger, she thundered open the bathroom door, stormed inside, and came face to face with her husband. He was standing naked in front of the mirror. It was obvious he was about to take a shower. Tilting her head toward her wife, Susie saw that Kyle wasn't surprised, just smirking. You're a fucking asshole! No one used you! Who were you with? Is it that girl from your office, the secretary? Brianna? Susie screamed with pain and anger. I'm going to take a shower. We can talk when I'm done, Kyle replied calmly and detachedly. To wash off the stench of that fool? No! I want to talk now, Susie blurted out loudly. Ignoring his wife's demand, Kyle stepped into the already running shower. Angry at his indifference, Susie thought for a moment about dragging him out of the shower, but the thought was too desperate, so it disgusted her, and instead Susie retreated to the bedroom to wait for Kyle. A few minutes later, Kyle entered the bedroom, wrapping a towel around his pelvis and thighs. You asshole! How could you? How could you cheat on me? Already asking that question filled Susie with remorse, shame, and guilt, but she couldn't help herself, and continued to berate him for another minute or so until Kyle raised his hand to silence her. He himself hadn't said a word yet. Breathing heavily, Susie closed her mouth. She didn't know what Kyle would say, maybe some lame apology or excuse. She just knew that if she didn't like what she heard, she would renew her verbal assault. After making sure his wife wasn't going to continue her speech, Kyle walked over to the dresser, pulled out a drawer, and pulled out his underwear. He threw off the towel and in front of his wife began to slowly put on his clothes. Seeing him naked, Susie stared at his medium-sized equipment. That innocent softness created unsolicited thoughts flashed through her mind. She was about to say something when suddenly Kyle spoke. "You know, she called me, at the office, said she needed to talk to me. It was Beth. Whatever it was, she refused to discuss over the phone. She insisted on seeing me in person. Naturally, I was puzzled. Still, I figured it had something to do with the wedding." He paused to pull on a t-shirt. "She also insisted that we meet here at the house. At first, I'd stonewalled. I had a lot of work to do, but she said it was very important. So I agreed. When I got home, she was already here waiting. I thought we would go inside and talk, but she insisted that she wanted to go somewhere else to talk, and that we should take the same car, hers." Stepping away from the dresser, Kyle went into the bathroom and retrieved the clothes he had removed. Walking back out, he began emptying his pockets and folding his clothes. Susie was too puzzled by what Kyle was saying to try to respond. Instead, she waited patiently for him to continue, her anger subsiding for a moment. "We ended up at some club. It was well past noon, so it wasn't actually very crowded. She took me to a secluded area so we could talk in private, as she said, and ordered us a couple drinks." Hearing her husband's casual words, Susie felt herself start to shake. She felt the blood slowly drain from her face, leaving behind a tingling cold. At first, we talked about the usual topics, how things were going and such. Then 3 more women showed up. One I recognized from a party we'd once been to. The other 2 were strangers to me, but they all said they knew you. As we talked, it was nothing but the usual shit again. We knocked back a few more drinks, and then things got interesting. Somehow I passed out. Unable to contain herself, Susie squeaked incredulously. "What?" "Uh-huh," Kyle confirmed. "I blacked out. When I came to, I was lying there. I was cold. And you know why I was cold? Because I was completely naked. Can you believe that?" Kyle asked with a sad laugh. But things were getting even more interesting. When I woke up, I found the bed shaking. As it turned out, it was Beth riding me, and she was riding me like some kind of stallion. She was naked too, by the way. Listen, she reminded me of you 20 years ago when your breasts were perky and high, your ass tight and firm. Susie realized what Kyle meant. Beth was 28 and still retained the hardness and firmness of youth. Still, the comparison of her then and her now was offensive. It also brought out Susie's anger again. Needless to say, but I was completely confused about what was happening. I was asking myself, how did I get there? How did Beth set me up so easily? So I asked. In fact, I was so angry at being used in this way, and without prior consent, that I roared. Nothing good came of it. Beth was so engrossed that she didn't seem to have heard, or if she did, she didn't seem to care. Finished folding the clothes, Kyle turned to face the dresser and began sorting through the things lying there. Susie sat mesmerized by her husband's story, so stunned that she couldn't speak yet. I tried to sit up, and then I noticed someone sitting on my legs. My arms were stretched out to the sides, my wrists tightly gripped by someone else's hands, and my palms were just as tightly clasped in something wet and soft. I couldn't see who was sitting on my legs because Beth's heaving body was in the way, but from the sides I could still see the same 2 new girls from the club holding my hands. In addition, they were both naked. Susie had heard enough. However, she was so furious, so enraged, that all she could do was hiss, spitting out her bile. Anyway, I figured it was that girl from the party who was holding my legs. Mind you, I was still feeling weak and dazed, so no matter how hard I struggled, I couldn't get out of the girl's grip. "Are you still listening to me, Sue?" Getting to her feet, Susie said. not addressing anyone in particular. I'm going to kill her! Hold on, honey. There's something else I need to tell you. Turning quickly to Kyle, Susie said with disdain in her voice, I don't want to hear the rest of your story at all, Kyle. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. How could you and her... I mean, she's my best friend. Was my best friend. Why would she do this to me? That's exactly where I'm going with this. Can I continue now? Okay, Kyle, but I don't want to hear the details. Not one word about love, Susie said coldly. Okay, honey. Well, I mean, when she was done, she jumped off me. She moved around to hold my legs, replacing the other girl who immediately started climbing on top of me. Kyle, warned Susie, stretching out his name. Sighing, Kyle looked directly at his wife and said, Look, Sue, I'm the victim here. I've been kidnapped by 4 sex-crazed women who used me against my will. Why this happened will become clear in a moment. I really think you need to hear what I have to say. Okay, but don't talk about love. So this girl from the party, by the way, her name is... Kyle started to say, but Susie interrupted him. I don't care what her name is. I don't want to hear anything at all. But since you seem so determined to tell me everything, I'm listening. But don't stick it out, Kyle. I'm not. But for it to make sense, it has to be in sequence, okay? Besides, you're the one who wanted to talk, so I'm talking. Caught off guard by Kyle's raised voice, Susie just shrugged. Like I said, this girl, Shanna, was at Beth's bachelorette party, as were the other 2 girls. So as Shanna continued to move on me, things got even more interesting. Watching his wife's reaction, Kyle continued. Beth started to explain a few things. The first thing she said was that she wished to get even. Noticing that Sue was about to say something, he beat her to it, saying, Wait, don't interrupt, Sue. Don't say a word until I've finished. If you walk out of this room before I'm done, I won't discuss it again. The look she threw at him could have frozen the hell out of him. But she didn't say a word. Instead, she hissed unhappily and started pacing the room again. The second thing Beth said was that she didn't believe a man could be unconscious and still have a benefit. Unconscious is probably too strong since she was referring to drunken swooning, which is actually semi-consciousness. See, apparently someone made love to her fiancé while he was drunk and passed out. Are you still with me? A nauseous feeling began to crowd out the anger Sue was holding back. Her stomach twisted and nausea suddenly set in. Sue looked down at her feet, quickly swallowing the sour bitterness that came to her throat, burning it, while Kyle's words rang in her ears like mad church bells. I was a guinea pig to see if a man could experience pleasure under the same conditions as Beth's fiancé, Andy. Apparently, he wasn't lying, which put Beth in a tricky position since she didn't believe him, and now here we go. You won't know until you try it, so to speak. Thirdly, Beth explained why I was chosen. Apparently, you let off the brakes completely, even snorting some kind of drug and drinking a lot. I can understand letting off steam, but you went a little further. Didn't you, Susan? When his wife refused to look up, preferring to remain silent, Kyle continued, They all saw you sleeping with 2 strippers, and then you disappeared. When the girls noticed you were gone, they got worried and went looking for you. They noticed your car across the street, parked at the same motel where they had now taken me. Can you imagine that? What a coincidence. So after they had a nice talk with the porter gave them a key card and they went to the room you had rented. In fact, it was the same room they took me to. It must be one of the popular ones. Anyway, thinking you were sleeping there, they figured they could join you, since they were pretty drunk too. Only they weren't so drunk that they didn't realize what they were seeing. After pausing for a few seconds to wait for his wife's reaction, who only groaned quietly, Kyle continued, They saw you and Andy making love like 2 rabbits. Well, actually, only you did, but Andy wasn't completely unconscious, as they saw him moving around a bit too. I guess even dead drunk people react. So now you understand the reason for my kidnapping and subsequent use. Anyway, by the time all the girls had done their thing to me, I had sobered up, regained my strength, and was fully conscious, but the deed was already done. When the last girl had gotten her way, Beth called Andy to apologize for not believing him. Unfortunately, she also explained why she believed him now. Needless to say, Andy wasn't happy. Not at all. He was so upset that he canceled the wedding, breaking off the engagement over the phone. So, don't worry about Beth's wedding because now there won't be one. Looking at his wife, he could see how much she was hurting. He wasn't intentionally trying to hurt her, but he wasn't unhappy with her pain either. Well, that's it. Finale. Do you have anything to add to what Beth said? Shaking her head, Susie said quietly, No. Okay, I'm going to bed then. I'm bloody tired. It had been a long day and an even longer evening. In a barely audible whisper, Susie asked the question that filled her heart with fear. Will you divorce me? Kyle sat up on the bed and yawning said, Beth and the girls confirmed that you were high and drunk, so I'll leave it at that this time because as far as I know, you've never done anything like this before. Beth, however, is not so lenient. I doubt she'll be calling you anytime soon. Reaching up to turn off the lamp on the night table, Kyle heard Susie ask another question. In a quiet voice, his wife asked, Kyle, did you like it? Turning his head toward her, he grinned slightly. As Kyle thought back over the past few hours, he remembered something else. Just so you know, the girls were putting me on the defensive. Beth apologized, but said that since you and I are making love, she didn't want them to get anything you could pass on to me. And I hope you didn't pass anything on to me, Sue. With those words, he turned off the light and made himself comfortable, already half asleep. In a sleepy voice, Susie's husband said one more thing. By the way, Beth said we could get drunk again sometime. Good night, dear. Soon the only sounds audible in the bedroom were breathing in a slow, steady rhythm and ragged sobs. The end!